Alright, let's talk about numbers that should terrify Beijing. And I'm not talking about GDP growth or trade deficits. I'm talking about babies. Or rather, the lack of them. China just dropped its 2025 population data. And it's an absolute disaster. We're talking record low births, accelerating deaths, and a population collapse that's happening faster than anyone predicted. And the scariest part, the official numbers might actually be hiding how bad things really are. Let me break this down for you. The 2025 catastrophe, January 2026. China's National Bureau of Statistics announced that only 7.92 million babies were born in 2025, compared to 11.31 million deaths. That's a net population loss of 3.39 million people in 1 year. To put that in perspective, China lost more people than the entire population of Chicago in just 12 months. The birth rate fell to 5.63 per 1,000 people, the lowest on record since 1949, the year Mao took power. We're talking 76 years of records, and this is rock bottom. But here's where it gets even worse. That 7.92 million births in 2025 represents a 17% drop from 9.54 million in 2024, a 17% decline in 1 year. Now, some of that drop was expected. 2024 was the year of the dragon in the Chinese zodiac, considered super auspicious for having kids. Lots of couples timed their pregnancies for it. 2025 was the year of the snake, which is less popular, so there was always going to be some decline. But 17%? That's not just zodiac superstition. That's structural collapse. The total population now stands at 1.408 billion, down from 1.411 billion in 2024. This is the third consecutive year of population decline since China's population peaked in 2021 at 1.413 billion, and the pace is accelerating. Meanwhile, deaths hit their highest level since 1968. The death rate climbed to 8.04 per 1,000 people. Why 1968? That was right after the Cultural Revolution's worst years. We're talking about a death rate not seen in over half a century. This isn't a blip. This isn't temporary. This is the beginning of a demographic avalanche that will reshape China and the world for the rest of this century. Here's the thing nobody's saying loud enough. China's official statistics are probably inflated. The World Bank data showed China's fertility rate fell to 1.0 in 2023. That's the total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman has in her lifetime. You need 2.1 just to maintain population size. China's at 1.0, but some researchers think it's actually lower, way lower. Independent demographers have been questioning Chinese population data for years. Local governments in China have financial incentives to inflate their numbers because funding is tied to population, so they report more people than actually exist. Some researchers don't use official birth numbers at all. Instead, they track things like mandatory newborn vaccines, because every baby in China is supposed to get certain vaccines. And those numbers are harder to fake. Those estimates, they suggest births might be even lower than the official 7.92 million. One prominent researcher, Yi Fuxian from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has argued for years that China's population is actually about 100 million people smaller than Beijing claims. He believes the population already stands at 1.3 billion and will reach about 1 billion by mid-century if fertility stabilizes at around 0.8. Think about that. Official numbers say 1.4 billion. He's saying 1.3 billion. That's a margin of error the size of Japan. And if the fertility rate is actually 0.8 instead of 1.0, we're talking South Korea territory. South Korea's fertility rate is 0.73. Taiwan's is 0.86. Hong Kong's is 0.73. These are the lowest rates ever recorded in human history, and China might already be there. There's another data point that's concerning. The gap between registered births and actual births. In China, parents are supposed to register their newborns for household registration, called hukou, but registration numbers have consistently been lower than official birth statistics. Some demographers think that's because local officials are padding the birth numbers to meet targets. In some provinces, the discrepancy is huge. Official birth numbers might say 500,000, but only 400,000 babies get registered. Where are the missing 100,000? They probably never existed. If we assume the real fertility rate is closer to 0.8 or 0.9, then actual births in 2025 could be as low as 6 to 7 million, not 7.9 to million. That would mean China's population decline is even faster than the official statistics show. Why does this matter? Because all the projections and policy responses are based on official data. If the real situation is 20% worse than reported, then China's demographic crisis is arriving faster and harder than anyone is prepared for. So why aren't Chinese people having kids? Beijing has thrown everything at this problem. Cash subsidies, extended maternity leave from 98 days to 158 days, tax breaks, housing assistance, free preschool. They even started taxing condoms to make them more expensive. None of it is working. Because the problem isn't incentives. It's fundamental economics and culture. First, the cost of raising kids in China is insane. We're talking about a hyper-competitive society where education is everything. Parents are expected to pay for expensive tutoring, extracurricular activities, and ultimately, a house for their child when they grow up. Housing prices in major Chinese cities are astronomical. We're talking 30 to 40 times the average annual salary in places like Beijing and Shanghai. One study found that the average cost of raising a child from birth to age 18 in China is about 485,000 yuans, or roughly $68,000. That's nearly 7 times China's per capita GDP. In the US, it's about 4 times per capita GDP. In France, it's less than 3 times. Second, work culture is brutal. Young people face long working hours, job insecurity, and intensifying workplace competition. The infamous 996 culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, is common in tech and finance. When are you supposed to have time for kids? When are you supposed to even meet someone to marry? Third, women's education has skyrocketed. More educated women means lower birth rates everywhere in the world. It's not unique to China, but it's happening faster there than anywhere else. Chinese women now make up the majority of university graduates. They have career ambitions. They're not willing to sacrifice everything for motherhood like previous generations. Fourth, marriage rates are cratering. Only 6.1 million couples married in 2024, down from 7.68 million in 2023, a 20% drop in 1 year. You generally need marriage before births in China's conservative society. Fewer marriages means fewer babies. Why aren't people getting married? Economic insecurity, impossibly high bride prices in rural areas, gender imbalances from the one-child policy, and a growing cultural shift where young people are prioritizing personal freedom over family obligations. Fifth, there's massive gender inequality in domestic labor. Chinese women still do the vast majority of housework and childcare, even when they work full-time. Surveys show Chinese husbands spend an average of 48 minutes per day on housework, while wives spend over 2 hours. Who wants to sign up for that? And finally, there's the elephant in the room. Young Chinese people are pessimistic about the future. The economy is struggling. Youth unemployment officially hit 18.8% in 2024. Before they stopped publishing the data, the real number is probably higher. The real estate market, where most Chinese families keep their wealth, has crashed. Tech sector layoffs, crackdowns on private business, zero COVID lockdowns that destroyed livelihoods. Why bring a child into that? There's even a movement among young Chinese called lying flat, basically opting out of the rat race entirely. No marriage, no kids, minimal consumption, just existing. When your youth culture is built around giving up, you're not going to have a baby boom. Now, let's talk about the other half. Deaths. China recorded 11.31 million deaths in 2025, with a death rate of 8.04 per 1,000 people, the highest since 1968. Why are deaths rising? Because China's population is aging rapidly. The population of those aged over 60 hit 323 million in 2025, making up 23% of the total population, up from 22% in 2024. That's almost a quarter of the country over 60, and it's going to get worse, much worse. By 2050, the proportion of Chinese people aged 65 and above will rise from about 15% to 35%. More than 1 in 3 Chinese people will be retirement age. The number of people over 80 is going to triple from 37 million today to 132 million by mid-century. And here's the kicker. As this huge elderly population ages and dies, the death rate is going to keep climbing. We're not at peak deaths yet, not even close. Why is China aging so fast? 2 reasons: the one-child policy and rising life expectancy. The one-child policy, enforced from 1980 to 2015, created a demographic bottleneck. An entire generation had only one child. Now those single children are in their 30s and 42nd, and they're supporting to parents and often for grandparents. The family structure looks like an inverted pyramid. 1 or 2 young people at the bottom supporting a whole pyramid of elders on top. Meanwhile, life expectancy has soared. In 1960, the average Chinese person lived to 44. Today it's 78. That's incredible progress. But it means people are living longer, while fewer babies are being born to replace them. The result? China is aging faster than any country in history. It took France 115 years for the share of the population over 65 to go from 7% to 14%. It took the US 69 years. China did it in 27 years. And China is getting old before it gets rich. When Japan aged, it was already a wealthy country, with a per capita GDP of $30,000. China's per capita GDP is about $13,000. The country is racing to build a social safety net and pension system, while the demographic crisis is already here. The pension system is under massive stress. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences warned in 2019 that China's main pension fund could run out of money by 2035. That was before the pandemic, before the economic slowdown, before births collapsed even further. The situation is worse now. Here's the math. In 2020, there were about 5.8 working age people for every person over 65. By 2050, that ratio will be 1.6 to 1. Imagine trying to fund a pension system with those numbers. It's nearly impossible. This is why deaths will keep rising through mid-century and beyond. The huge cohorts born in the 1960s, 72nd, 82nd, and 92nd will eventually age into their 70s and 82nd and die. And there won't be enough young people to replace them. So let's game this out. What happens to China's population over the next 25 years? The United Nations projects China's population will decline from 1.408 billion in 2025 to about 1.313 billion by 2050. That's a loss of roughly 95 million people, close to the entire population of Vietnam. But that's just the headline number. Let's break down what's happening year by year. In 2026, China is projected to lose about 3.2 million people, roughly the population of Arkansas. By 2030, the cumulative loss will be 17.9 million, close to the population of New York State. By 2040, China will have lost about 60 million people compared to 2025 levels. What's driving these losses? Births keep falling while deaths keep rising. Annual births are projected to drop from 7.92 million in 2025 to around 6.5 million by 2030, then to about 5 million by 2040. By 2050, births could be as low as 4 to 4.5 million per year. Why so low? Because the cohort of women of prime childbearing age keeps shrinking. China's population of women aged 20-39 hit 183 million in 2024. That same cohort peaked in 2002 at 224 million. So there are already 41 million fewer women in their prime childbearing years than 20 years ago. And it's getting worse. The number of women aged 2029, the peak childbearing years, will fall from about 100 million today to roughly 60 million by 2035. Even if the fertility rate somehow stabilized or even increased slightly, you'd still see total births fall because there are simply fewer potential mothers. Meanwhile, annual deaths are projected to rise from 11.31 million in 2025 to about 13 million by 2030, then to 15 million by 2040, and potentially 16 to 17 million by 2050. The death rate will climb as the large cohorts born in the 1960 seconds and 1970 seconds age into their 70s and 80 seconds. Remember, China had a massive baby boom in the 1960s, right after the Great Leap Forward famine ended. Those people are in their 60s now. By 2040, they'll be in their 80s. China's working age population, people aged 15 to 64, will shrink dramatically. It's already fallen from a peak of 1.01 billion in 2013 to about 960 million in 2025. By 2050, it could drop to around 700 million or lower. That's a loss of 260 million working age people in 37 years. That's more than the entire population of Brazil just vanishing from the workforce. The dependency ratio, the number of people under 15 or over 64 relative to the working age population, will skyrocket. In 2020, there were about 46 dependents for every 100 working age people. By 2050, that could be 80 or 90 dependents per 100 workers. Every 2 workers will be supporting almost 1 dependent. Try running an economy like that. This 25-year period from 2025 to 2050 is when China's demographic crisis goes from serious problem to existential threat. The economy will struggle. The pension system will be in crisis. Labor shortages will be severe. And the geopolitical implications will be enormous. If you think 2025 to 2050 is bad, wait until you see 2050 to 2100. This is when things get truly apocalyptic. The United Nations medium variant projection shows China's population falling from about 1.31 billion in 2050 to somewhere between 770 million and 800 million by 2100. That's a loss of more than 500 million people in the second half of the century. But remember, that medium scenario assumes China's fertility rate will gradually rise from current levels to about 1.48 by 2100. That's a huge assumption. What if it doesn't rise? What if it stays at 1.0 or even drops lower like South Korea? The UN's low variance scenario is absolutely terrifying. If fertility stays about 0.5 children below the medium variant, China's population could fall to as low as 488 million by 2100. Read that again. From 1.4 billion in 2025 to under 500 million by 2100. That would be a population collapse, unprecedented in human history. Outside of plague or war, China would lose almost 1 billion people in 75 years. Now, let's talk about the annual numbers during this period, because this is where it gets really wild. Annual deaths will continue climbing through the 2050s and peak in the early 2060s. The biggest population drops arrive around 2060 to 2065. In some years during that period, China could lose 13 to 14 million people annually. Why such massive drops in the 2060s? Because that's when the huge cohort of people born in the 1982 and 1990s, right before and after the one-child policy starts dying off. These were the last large birth cohorts China had. And when they age into their 70s and 82s in the 2060s, deaths will spike. To give you a sense of scale, in 2062 alone, China could lose approximately 14 million people. That's 1.16 million people disappearing every month. Every single month. After the 2060s, the decline moderates somewhat, but only because there are fewer people left to die. Annual deaths will start falling, simply because the overall population is so much smaller. By the 2080s and 2092s, you might see annual deaths drop to 8 to 10 million, but births will be incredibly low, maybe 3 to 4 million per year. So the population keeps shrinking, just at a slightly slower rate. The really disturbing part, the median age of China's population will be absurdly high. By 2100, the median age could be in the mid-50s. Half the country will be over 55 years old. For context, the median age in the US today is 38. The proportion of people over 80 will be staggering. By 2100, roughly 15–20% of China's population could be over 80 years old. That means out of a population of 500 to 800 million, you'd have 75 to 160 million people over 80. Who's going to care for them? Who's going to pay for their healthcare? Who's going to keep the economy running? These aren't hypothetical questions. This is what the projections show. And short of some dramatic technological revolution, artificial wombs, or life extension technology that keeps people working into their 80s, there's no way around it. This isn't just a demographic story. This has massive economic and strategic implications that will reshape the global order. Let's start with economics. China's working age population has been shrinking since 2012 and fell to 858 million in 2024, about 7 million fewer than in 2023. That's 61% of the population. By 2050, it could be under 50%. Fewer workers means lower economic growth. It means a smaller consumer base. It means fewer people paying into the pension system and more people drawing from it. The math doesn't work. China's been growing at breakneck speed for 40 years, largely because it had a massive young workforce. That's over. The demographic dividend has become a demographic debt. Some economists estimate that China's potential GDP growth rate, how fast the economy can grow given labor force and productivity trends, will fall from around 5% today to maybe 2–3 by the 2030s and potentially 1% or less by mid-century. For a country that still has hundreds of millions of people in poverty, that's devastating. And this is happening while China is trying to transition from a manufacturing economy to a high-tech, consumption-driven economy. Good luck with that when your consumer base is shrinking and aging. Old people don't buy new cars and smartphones at the same rate young people do. The real estate market has already collapsed, partly because of demographics. Fewer young people means less demand for housing. And since 70% of Chinese household wealth is tied up in property, this has created a massive wealth destruction effect that further depresses consumer spending and births. There's also the innovation problem. Most breakthrough innovations come from people in their 20s and 30s. A rapidly aging society is generally not a highly innovative one. This threatens China's ambitions to lead in AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, and other cutting-edge fields. Now, let's talk military and geopolitical implications. China wants to be a global superpower. It has ambitions in the South China Sea, toward Taiwan, across the Belt and Road. But power requires people. Xi Jinping set 2027 as a target by which Chinese forces should be capable of taking Taiwan. But what happens to military recruitment when you have fewer and fewer young men? China's pool of 18-year-old males prime military recruitment age will shrink dramatically over the next 20 years. And here's the psychological factor. Most of these young men are only children, single sons whose parents depend on them entirely. What happens to military families who lose their only son in a conflict? The social backlash could be enormous. Some researchers argue this is why China might actually become more aggressive in the short term, a use it or lose it mentality. If China wants to achieve its territorial ambitions, it needs to do so in the next 10 to 20 years before the demographic decline makes military adventurism too costly. There's also the question of global influence. China's rise as a superpower has been predicated on the assumption of continued growth and increasing weight in the global economy. But if China's economy stagnates or shrinks due to demographics, its influence will wane. The 21st century might not be the Chinese century after all. So is there any way out of this? Can China reverse the decline? Honestly, probably not. Fertility decline is really hard to reverse once it starts. No developed country with a fertility rate below 1.5 has ever successfully raised it back above 2.0, not 1. France has tried for decades with generous family policies. They've gotten their rate up to about 1.8 respectable, but still below replacement. And France is a wealthy country with a strong social safety net. China is middle income with a much weaker system. South Korea has spent over $200 billion on pro-natalist policies. Over the past 16 years, they've tried everything: cash payments, subsidized housing, free childcare, extended parental leave, you name it. Their fertility rate has only gone down, hitting a catastrophic 0.73 in 2024, the lowest in the world. If South Korea can't reverse it with massive spending, what makes anyone think China can? China is trying, don't get me wrong. Provinces are rolling out all kinds of incentives. Sichuan offers cash bonuses. Hejiang extended maternity leave to 158 days. Beijing is building more childcare centers. Shenzhen offers housing subsidies for families with children. But none of this addresses the fundamental structural problems. Housing is still unaffordable in major cities. Work culture is still brutal. Gender inequality in domestic labor is still massive. Economic opportunities for young people are still limited. And the cultural shift toward individualism and away from family obligation is probably irreversible. Some have suggested China could open up to immigration. After all, that's how the US has maintained population growth even with below replacement fertility. Why can't China do the same? A few problems with that. First, China has never been an immigrant destination. The culture is relatively homogeneous. There's significant social resistance to immigration, especially from non-East Asian countries. Second, there's no infrastructure for it, no pathways to citizenship, no integration programs, no cultural acceptance. Third, and most importantly, where would the immigrants come from in numbers large enough to matter? You'd need tens of millions of immigrants per year to offset China's population decline. India, Southeast Asia, Africa, those regions have their own demographic transitions happening. And would those people even want to move to China? With its authoritarian government, language barriers, and social discrimination against foreigners? It's not realistic. What about technology? Could artificial wombs or other reproductive technologies change the equation? Maybe, but not in time to matter for the next few decades. And even if the technology existed, would people use it? If people don't want children because of economic and cultural reasons, giving them a new way to have children doesn't solve the problem. Could China ban abortion or contraception to force births higher? Theoretically, but that would be massively unpopular, especially among educated urban women. And it wouldn't address why people don't want kids in the first place. Romania tried forcing births in the 1960s under Ceausescu. It created a demographic bump, but also tremendous human suffering and social dysfunction. Not a model anyone should follow. The reality is that China's demographic collapse is probably locked in. The only question is how fast and how far. Here's where we are. China's population is collapsing. The official 2025 numbers show 7.92 million births and 11.31 million deaths, for a net loss of 3.39 million people. But the real situation might be even worse, with fertility potentially as low as 0.8 to 1.0, putting China in the same catastrophic category as South Korea and Hong Kong. The numbers tell a clear story. Next 5 years, 2025 to 2030, China will lose roughly 18 million people. Births will fall from 7.92 million to about 6.5 million per year. Deaths will rise from 11.31 million to about 13 million. The working age population will shrink by tens of millions. Next 25 years, 2025 to 2050, China will lose approximately 95 to 140 million people, depending on assumptions. The population will fall to somewhere between 1.27 and 1.31 billion. Births could drop as low as 4 to 5 million per year. Deaths will climb towards 16-17 million annually. More than 1/3 of the population will be over 65. 2050 to 2100, this is when it gets truly catastrophic. China could lose another 500 to 600 million people. By 2100, the population could be as low as 488 million in pessimistic scenarios, or maybe 770,800 million in more optimistic ones. Annual deaths will peak in the 2060 seconds at around 14 million per year as the last large cohorts die off. The median age will be in the mid-50s. To summarize the trajectory, China goes from 1.4 billion people today to potentially under 1 billion by 2070 and potentially under 700 million by 2100. That's a loss of more than 700 million people in 75 years. This is the fastest peacetime population collapse in history, and it's going to reshape everything. China's economy will struggle to grow. Innovation will slow. The pension system will face crisis. Labor shortages will be severe. Military recruitment will become difficult. Global influence will wane. The Chinese century that everyone predicted in the 2010s, it might be over before it really began. Demographics are destiny, and China's demographic destiny is decline. The really tragic part, this was avoidable. If China had ended the one-child policy earlier, if it had invested more in family support, if it had created a more family-friendly economy and culture, maybe things would be different. But it didn't. And now it's probably too late. We're watching in real time as the world's most populous country enters a demographic death spiral, and there's no clear way out. That's the story. Those are the numbers. And whether you're watching from Beijing or Washington or anywhere else in the world, you should be paying attention, because this is going to reshape the 21st century in ways we're only beginning to understand. China's population crisis isn't just China's problem. It's going to affect global supply chains, international security, technological development, and the entire balance of power. And it's happening right now.